Hey y'all, I'm Melissa Guerra. I'm the Kitchen Wrangler, and welcome back to my weekly podcast where I am talking about food history. And I am up to 47 subscribers. So I love each and every one of y'all. Thank you so much for subscribing. And you might hear some rumbling. That is my husband up in the studio up above. And I don't mean heaven, I mean literally, there's 2 floors here. So he's in the studio up above rolling around. So you might hear him working on his artwork. But I'm downstairs here and I am talking about food history. And, when I first started, and me, low tech, I got to upgrade from paper, but here we are. When I started this podcast, I thought, well, I'm going to go on YouTube and I'm going to lay down some knowledge that's going to be really dignified and super interesting. And I'm going to be like the new Attenborough of South Texas. Now that's not quite happening because what happens when I am researching my subjects is I go down these rabbit holes of really weird stuff. And a lot of it, like, I don't think is all that polite to share. But maybe that's just me being old-fashioned and expecting that every conversation needs to be polite. So I'm just going to experiment here and share with you what I found down the rabbit hole. It's a little weird, but anyway, let's just go with it. I'm weird, you're weird, we're all weird. All 47, well, with me 48, we're all weird. So let's just weird out, okay? So the idea this week is that our body is a food processor. And I really don't want to talk about our southern hemisphere as being a food processor because that's not what we're talking about today. It's not a great subject anyway. We're going to talk about our northern hemisphere above the belt and what that does for food processing. And I want to speak about one ingredient in particular, and of course, is one of my very favorite subjects, corn, zea mays. That's a scientific name. And I love talking about corn because corn fed the native tribes here in the Americas before it was colonized. Corn fed the colonists once they got here. It was shared with them, and it was the food that grew really well here in the Americas. And today, corn is a global commodity, turning into ethanol, which fuels our automobiles, which I think is a really big deal that it went from feeding us to feeding our cars. So, and to quote the amazing song by Hayward Banks, he's a musician that I love. In one of his songs, it's all about corn, and the lyrics go, corn, corn, corn. Look for it on YouTube. It's a hilarious song. Anyway, so more specifically on my deep dive in corn this week, I was looking at hominy, which hominy is a type of corn. When we're here in the U.S., we're thinking sweet corn. But, I do have a slideshow, and let's see if I can bring it up. Okay, yeah, that is corn. And, but that is, I don't know what kind of corn that is. That looks like dent corn, sort of. But there's so many different varieties of corn. I think here in the U.S., all we think about is sweet corn that we have at barbecues or popcorn that we have at the movies. Is anybody going to the movies anymore? It is so expensive. If y'all are going to the movies, let me know. I'm in love with Netflix. I stay home. I hear they're changing that password thing. I don't know if I'll be in love with Netflix forever, but it's today. Today I love Netflix. Anyway, back in the day, we did have popcorn at the movies when we went to the movies. But I was looking into hominy, and I kept coming across this historical way to, let's look at some hominy. That is actually a Peruvian choclo, which is closer to hominy. And I just love the way it looks. It looks kind of like Flintstone-y, sort of yabba dabba doo. It looks a little prehistoric. But you can see the great variation between all of the different kinds of corn that we consume. But this one technique that I kept coming across when I was doing all of this historical research was the idea of people consuming dishes that were made with corn that had been chewed in the human mouth and then spit out and then put into that beverage or that dish. And you're probably grossing out. I know you're grossing out. It sounds a little gross, but please don't click off. Please all 47 of you, I really think this is worth your time. So this, it was not just used. Well, we're just going to focus on corn because we could get into like a global discussion of pre-chewed food that's added to other food. I don't want to do that. I just want to talk about corn. We're just staying in the Americas. And, I wanted to remind you of this little factoid that the earliest evidence of the cultivation of corn is around 7,000 years ago. And coincidentally, it is not that far from where I am sitting. It is, as the crow flies, golly, I would say maybe a 2 hour, well, not, you can't say as the crow flies and then say how far it's going to be if you got in your car, because those are two different things. Anyway, if I got in my car, if I got my truck, it'd be about a 2 hour drive. So one of the earliest archaeological sites where they found that corn was cultivated is in the state of Tamaulipas, which is just right across the border, right across the river. I'm in South Texas, really close to the river, and it's right here. It's very close by. And so the earliest evidence was dated to about 7,000 years ago. There's my husband, if you heard that rumble. Now, here's a few other dates that I want to remind you of. So bacteria was not discovered until maybe about 360 years ago. Fungus, 175 years ago, and viruses, 135 years ago. That does not mean they didn't exist. Of course, bacteria, fungus, fungi, funguses, and viruses, all of those existed in the world. They have existed since the earth began. But humans only figured out that they existed with bacteria 360 years ago. That's not that long ago, especially if you consider, how old is the world? 14 billion years, something like that. And compared to the cultivation of corn, if corn had been cultivated, we have evidence over 7,000 years ago. 360 years ago, that's a blip. Now, and the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, which was when they started, they called it the Communicable Disease Center, which was kind of convenient, CDC, but now it's the Center for Disease Control. That was founded in 1946. So humans, in our knowledge base, in our pooled knowledge, we have only become aware of bacteria, fungus, and viruses pretty recently. Within the lifetime of my father, the CDC started. So it's not that long ago. So the idea of humans chewing corn and then contributing that chewed corn and saliva to food, it might seem gross, but before 360 years ago, nobody would have thought twice about it. They just would not have, because they were not aware of bacteria. For me, this is very foreign because I wash my hands about 40 times a day when I'm in the kitchen, or I'm out with the dogs, or I'm out on the ranch. I come back in, I wash my hands, I take a shower, and we do that because we now have this knowledge about bacteria and viruses, but it just wasn't the case for a long time. So one of the dishes or beverages that I wanted to show you that is, that is an example of our germy bacteria filled mouth. And I thought that is a really frightening photo. I tried to crop out most of his face. I couldn't do it. You know how challenged I am with this ridiculous PowerPoint thing. So I figured he's about as scary as bacteria and viruses and fungus. So anyway, I left his whole face in there. So now let's get on to chicha de jora. And chicha de jora is a fermented beverage that is made out of corn. And if you know about chicha de jora, you might know that it is famous because, it's delicious. I've had it before. And when I was in Peru, they pour a little bit out onto the ground, onto the earth, to the Pachamama as a tribute. But the fermentation process is started by chewing the corn and then spitting it into a big vat where the fermentation starts. Now, I don't know, honestly, if the chicha de jora that I had was started that way. I don't know. I have a pretty boring life. If I had chicha de jora that was made in the old-fashioned way, that's about as exciting as my life gets. That is about as edgy as my life has ever gotten, is drinking chicha de jora made in the traditional pre-chewed corn recipe. Anyway, Uh, but why would you do that? Like, are you just, is it something spiritual? Like, why would you chew up corn and then spit it into the fermentation vat for chicha de jora? Interestingly enough, the human saliva has enzymes, and what those enzymes do is that it breaks down the starch that is in the corn and it starts the fermentation process. And just as a reminder, I know you already know this because y'all are smart. All 47 of y'all are really smart. That fermentation is a process in which sugars are converted into ethyl alcohol. So starch has to be converted to sugar, and then sugar turns into alcohol. But you have to kind of get it kicked off. And corn is not really great with that. So you need some sort of enzyme to get it going. And chewing the corn and then spitting it into a barrel then starts breaking down the sugars and starts getting the fermentation. It just kicks the whole thing off. So that's why the ancient Incans discovered that this was a way to make a fermented beverage, and the fermented beverage had ethyl alcohol, made you happy. It all worked out. You can get a similar effect if you malt or sprout the corn, but people always seem to remember the chewing and the saliva part just a little bit more. And there was one other thing that I wanted to show you. Hold on, let me grab this book. If you're very curious about corn, this is, let me get back to my big screen here. Right. This book, can you see it? The Story of Corn by Betty Fussell. Legendary Betty Fussell. Met her a few times. Really nice woman, incredibly knowledgeable. Anything she ever wrote, y'all should read it, and read it well. I read it over and over again. And anyway, her Story of Corn won a Julie Child Cookbook Award many years ago, but she is legend. Anyway, she was telling a story about Major Powell. So John Wesley Powell, that guy, holy cow. Which one was scarier, my bacteria mouth guy or John Wesley Powell? I think it's a dead heat. I think they're both kind of scary. So she had a little story about John Wesley Powell, and he wrote quite a bit, studied the Native Americans and the Southwest before it was truly part or considered part of the U.S. And in 1875, he is talking about something that he referred to as virgin hash, where Hopi, the Native American Hopi tribe, the Hopi women, or I will assume the virgins, the girl, which would be girls. So what he would call virgin hash was the girls would chew up meat and corn. They would chew them and they would spit them out into these little balls, and then they would wrap it in a corn husk and then boil it like a dumpling. To me, this sounds like a tamale. This sounds like ground corn and meat, exactly like a tamale. And we have evidence. I mean, he witnessed this, and so therefore, and he wrote about it. So we know that the Hopi women were doing this, and they were in the Southwest. But I mean, this technique could have been used if we have chicha that was made with chewing and spitting in Peru, and then you've got the Hopi that are chewing and spitting up in the New Mexico, the U.S. New Mexico area, then you could probably assume that between those 2 points, between Peru and New Mexico, there was chewing and spitting that was going on all throughout that swath in Central and South America, or North America. Well, Mexico's North America, and then we get down to South America with Peru. So, but anyway, that whole swath of the Americas, this chewing and spitting technique was probably wherever there was corn before there were colonists. It was just what they did. So, yeah, so they had this virgin hash, and it sounded like a tamale, and it had to be chewed by a virgin, because one of the things that I was finding with this chewing and spitting technique is what you looked like if you were attractive or if you were a virgin. That was part of the recipe. that would determine whether it was a good batch or not, whether the person who chewed it was attractive or if they were a virgin. And so and with these dumplings that the Hopi made, if you got a pre-chewed tamale that was made by a non-virgin, well, that was considered an insult. So you couldn't be just a regular old woman with a regular life. You had to be a virgin, and then that would be considered a delicacy. So I thought that was fascinating. So yeah, that's where I went when I got out in the weeds with my research on corn and on humans have spent more time on this planet than Cuisinarts or Vitamixes or blenders or immersion blenders or knives. And so humans had to come up with really, novel ways to process food to take it to the next level, to make corn into alcohol. So, yep, that was where I went down the rabbit hole. And so, but make sure you subscribe. Oh, I have something to tell all 47 of y'all that I'm so glad that y'all subscribe. I'm going to take a couple of weeks and go into hiatus only because I want to improve my whole podcasting setup. I need to level up. And I've got a couple of jobs that I need to do this summer, but I am really enjoying this opportunity to study, to get out in the weeds with you. I'm really enjoying it. I'm really glad that you're here. I love seeing new subscribers. So make sure you tell your nerdy friends that we're here and we're getting weird. And we're talking about people pre-chewing corn, and we're talking about virgins making tamales with their teeth. And anyway, I'm gonna leave that there. But thank you for subscribing. And I will see you. Gosh, when will I see you? Well, I will let you know. But anyway, I'm gonna try to bring in someone that can help me improve my setup here. And anyway, I'm glad you're here. I'm rambling, but I'm gonna get back in the library, do a little bit more research. I'm always so glad you're here. Remember to subscribe to my food channel as well. Subscribe to my podcast. Follow me on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on TikTok. I'm not so much on TikTok. I'm really more here on YouTube or on Instagram. But I'm always, always, always so grateful for your subscribe. I really appreciate it. All right, I'm Melissa Guerra, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon on the podcast with massive improvements. They're on the way. Thanks so much, and tell your friends to subscribe. Bye now.